And we're on the air. So today we're going to talk about design systems and tooling for them, and kind of how to document your work in building these design systems. So we're working right now on a project that has a big library of React components, but nothing tying those components together in any kind of documented fashion. So there are some tools out there that can help us make nice living style guides. So today I'm going to show off Storybook, which I've been playing with lately to add some live documentation to this project we're working on. So let me share my screen.
Do you want to mirror the projector? Yeah.
There we go. So this is Storybook. I believe this started off as a React-only project, but is now also available for Vue.js. And the idea is to create a nice development environment and living style guide environment, basically. And it has, as they're showing in this little animation here, nice keyboard navigation to toggle between being full screen for your component, seeing the documentation, hiding panels, all that kind of stuff. So there's some other examples of design systems I wanted to show off real quick that kind of Storybook was developed in parallel with, that take very similar approaches to how to talk about their design system and document all these components. So one of them is Salesforce Lightning. This is a really comprehensive design system for building apps on top of the Salesforce platform, where you can see they have, we'll look at our own Accordion in a few minutes, ways to change the different variants of a component in here, implementation details, developer guidelines, design guidelines. There's a lot here. Another great example of a design system that's taking a similar approach is Microsoft's Fabric that's used in Office UI. You can see some examples here. Best practices. Again, being able to show variants of your components in a living style guide is really helpful to both developers and designers who want to iterate on these components. So these are the things that we're trying to do with Storybook. So let me pull up what we have so far of a Storybook implementation. First, I'll show just a few kind of basic setup steps. When you run Storybook's kind of initializer scripts that they have in their documentation, you'll end up with a .storybook directory that has stuff like registering add-ons. We'll talk about add-ons a lot more in a few minutes. Some basic config. This is telling it where do I go and find all these stories and components that I want to display in the Storybook. And then it's got some Webpack configs. So in our case, we're using a lot of post-CSS tooling. So we needed to import that to make sure that that was reflected in Storybook. We also had to add in that, hey, we want to load in some markdown files. So what I'm doing with these markdown files is most of these components that are in the system that we're working with have README files already. And they're pretty extensive. They're good README files. So we want to be able to show those in the Storybook UI. So Storybook has a system of add-ons that have a nice plugin architecture that you kind of just install with NPM, and then you need to register it with Storybook. So in our case, there's one called Storybook README. And what that enables us to do is pull up in our Storybook instance a README for every, there it is. So yeah, now we have the README rendering inside of our Storybook environment for each component that has a story. So the workflow for generating these is, I was kind of assuming out of the box that, oh, it would just scan my components directory and automatically like show all the components that show up in that directory. that was not the case. Through iterations, it's kind of the pattern instead is to explicitly write your stories. So you're not having the design system tooling just scanning your components directory and rendering them all. You actually say in what fashion you want those components to render. So that's writing stories. So let's look at some story examples here. I wrote just the initial pass at some stories for this accordion component. So you can see it has this README decorator that just indicates to Storybook when it's loading that, hey, there's a README for this one. Go and find it. It's been imported. And then every story has a label. This feels a lot like writing test coverage. And then you actually put the markup for or the JSX for what's going to render into that ad story. So in this case, we're not doing anything special with this accordion component. We're just rendering it with like the bare minimum of anything. So we can see that here. Let's actually go to better presentation mode. That's nice. So you can see that it's getting rendered here in this panel. And if we want to isolate it, let's say for testing it in a responsive environment, we can do that real easy by just using keyboard shortcuts to toggle whether or not all those other panels show. This is rendered in an iframe, so it's completely isolated from everything else that's going on in Storybook. In our particular case, the project we're working on still has Bootstrap 3 CSS delivered globally, although that's changing very soon. So you can see in this case, this one probably has some other styles and stuff that show up in the actual app. And so Storybook setup is kind of a forcing mechanism to, oh yeah, I need to bulletproof this component against any other styles that are going on, and make sure that it is self-contained and has everything it needs. So I want to talk about a few more add-ons that are available for Storybook, and actually do a little bit of live coding with those. So let's do kind of the core workflow first of Storybook, which is adding another story. So we've got this accordion component. And we're going to add some more stories to it. So the best way to do that probably is to actually go look at the accordion component. Okay, so we can see some of the other properties that are available. It looks like these display when open and display when closed. Those look like they might be interesting to work with. Let's go look at the README and see what those are. They're used to place content in the accordion header. Great. So in the case of when the accordion is open, if we pass something into that property, it'll show up here. And if it's closed, it'll show something there. So let's add some stories for that. So we're going to add another story. And we'll say this one is for display when open. Okay. And
do the stories have to, or do the scenarios, adding a story, do they have to have like machine parsable, like variable names, like choose display with open?
Are you
no, they're just strings.
They're just strings. Line 14 to paren and 21. That should be good.
There we go. Oh, does this need another one?
No, I think it just needs to be gone.
Oh,
21.
Extra one.
Yep, there you go.
Much better. So we're going to have the same content in here again, but this time we're going to add display when open. And display when open, expect some JSX. So we can put in the example in the README here. Yep, is what we want an add item button when the accordion is closed. So we'll do that. I think we need an import button. button. Let's check that out. So now we have, yay, hot module reloading work. That's nice. So now we have a display when open story. So let's check that out. And yeah, it now renders that there. That's cool. So let's go ahead and add one more story. We'll add one for display when closed. Oh, that was not the syntax I wanted. There we go. And we'll copy this one. Yep, you bet. There we go. No?
No, yeah, that parentheses was
Really?
it's closing the block. Just delete right now. Just delete. Hit backspace twice. Come on. There you go.
Yay. All right, so when it's closed, what was the README example? It wants a count of how many items are inside of this thing. So that's what we'll do. Huh. Oh, it's because it's when closed. There we go. There it is. Interesting. So I wonder if there's a closed by default option that'll make that a little bit more useful. Open, there is. I'm assuming that's, yeah, it's a Boolean. Ah. Yay, that's better. Cool. So now that we've got some stories written, I can show off a couple of the other add-ons that are pretty cool. So there's a common one called Nobs. And what Nobs does is gives you the ability to play with the parts of your component actually in the Storybook UI. So you're not touching code at all, which is pretty cool for a living style guide that you can share among people who are also not developers without having to spin this up locally. So we've already got Nobs installed in our add-ons here. Yep. So what we can do is add some knobs to the accordion component. So probably the easiest one to do is we can have the text of the text label of the accordion so that we can change it down here in the knobs. No knobs at the moment. So the way we do that is we get our with knobs decorator helper thing. Yeah, it's a decorator. Knobs, and we're going to use the text one. And this is from add-on knobs. Cool. And then when we use the thing that we want to turn into a knob, we use the text helper that we imported and pass in, we basically give that thing a name. So in this case, in the form that'll show up in the knobs panel, we want to label this label, and we'll give it a default. So it was hello. I think we're missing a step. Yeah, we also need to add the decorator, the with knobs decorator. All right, let's see if that works. There it is. So we can add some text to it. We can try to break it. This one's pretty, actually, it'll be cool to see what it looks like. If we go to responsive mode, we can see how it actually breaks. It just stays on one line. That's interesting. Okay. So we can add that same knob in all these spots where we have that label, so it's available in all of the stories. And that'll be nice.
Does it not persist in different stories?
It does not. Actually, there might be a way to do that, but in this particular case, this way I'm doing it is the answer is no.
Can you dry it up? Is there a way to
Probably.
have, like, a top level accordion thing that everything hears from?
You could, but you also want to be careful with that. I don't know if you actually want to do that, because you want to be very explicit about recreating it every time. There are probably some nicer patterns though than what I'm using here.
Yeah, like it'd be cool if you had almost the same way you have contexts in, say, Mocha or RSpec or something.
Right. Would be nice. So the last add-on that I want to show off is action logging. So in this case, you can capture an event that happens with one of your components and make sure that it's flowing through, which again feels very much like writing tests and like speccing that out. So we already have. Let's check and make sure. Yep, add-on actions is loaded. Okay, or it's registered in Storybook. So we have that ready to go. And from here, we'll want to import that. And then, actually, let's, instead of doing this in the accordion, I'm going to do it in the button component just because that'll be a little bit easier. Go here. Oh, that's my button component itself, not the button story. Button stories, there we go. So when we know the button component has an on-click handler. So what we can do is on-click. We use the action helper that we imported, and we'll just call it like clicked. Uh-oh.
Okay, so they should fit.
Oh, there we go. Great. So now if we look at a button, you can see I've already added a knob to the button. We don't have a README, but if I click it, now the action's been exposed here in the UI. Instead of having to open up DevTools and like track it and all that kind of stuff. It doesn't tell you a whole lot in this particular event, but some events will have a lot more information than this. So kind of the next steps that I'm looking forward to learning with this tool are we have some kind of universal patterns that we want to encourage that are not component specific in this project. So I'll be trying to figure out how to get some like kind of like global documentation in here. So you can talk about, hey, this is the font stack for the app, and these are the kind of default colors and stuff like that. Because this will feel like a really good place to put that. That way we can bundle it up and serve it up as like on GitHub pages or whatever for the repo as like, hey, this is the full design system, not just the components. So looking forward to that.
Awesome.
Do we get any questions?
So for add-ons, is there like a central registry that you go get from that? Or are they just kind of scattered throughout GitHub?
Yeah, so the Storybook add-ons are just
people listening. Do you think you can restate?
right. So Joe was asking about if there's a central repository of Storybook add-ons, and the answer is no, there is not. They are kind of scattered around GitHub. A lot of them are from the Storybook project itself, but there are some others like this. The README one I'm using here was not from the Storybook project. It was a separate repo that was published on NPM. So.
I have a question. So, I mean, part of this is when I'm looking at it, you know, how high level can you even take it? Like, would it be feasible to, you know, do like help pages, like of how to do a particular workflow, like using Storybook? Because I see that a lot where, you know, whether it's Google or whether it's someone else, I'm like, how do I do this thing? And they're like, you go here, you click here, you do this. Would it be possible to do that, like with Storybook? I mean, or sorry, maybe advisable.
Probably not advisable because you don't have an entire app, right? And I'm not sure there's a way to like script workflows like that. But a common thing talked about in design systems is Brad Frost's idea of atomic design, where you're making components, but those components are of different types. So you start off with your atoms. That would be something like a button is definitely an atom, where it is the smallest chunk of a component. It's not composed of any other components. And then you work your way up to molecules. And in this case, like this accordion, actually I haven't dug into the accordion code. That might be a molecule, but something where you're composing with other components. Now that becomes a molecule. And then if you can even go a step above that, where you have whole organisms that are composed of several molecules, and those are kind of where you would be showing off those types of workflows. So something we've been talking about with the designer on this project is in these global documentation I mentioned, we want to be able to put like animated GIFs in there of like, hey, here's the right animation for this particular workflow, because sometimes that's hard to provide out of the box with a component. But you can demonstrate how to achieve that with a component and what the end product should look like. I
feel like that's something we discovered kind of in the last, or at least certainly clicked for me, that animations really need to be correct. Like the application, the thing that is composing.
Yep. Animations at the component level are really hard. Yeah,
they're not good.
You want to be composing transitions at the app level. Yeah.
Because the app understands the state change.
Right.
And the transitions ultimately represent that.
If you change kind of fundamental, I guess, DNA of a component, like say you add a property or change the name of a property, will this pick up on that essentially?
No, it will not.
So is there a way to lint it?
I was gonna say, how do you keep your CI?
It's a good question. I don't know a way to lint it. You're just kind of, as you're working on a component, it's up to you to make sure the documentation is up to date.
Or you consider like you could consider this to be an application. And
yes.
Run it like
yeah, you should treat it like an application, and you can actually run tests against it. In fact, that's a really common pattern to run visual regression tests against your Storybook. Yep.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. And I think Percy actually has like they say like, hey, we're great with Storybook. Yeah.
Well, that's phenomenal.
All right.
Outside of the other two that you showed us in the beginning, are there any other open source things like this of note? Or is this kind of like
this is kind of dominating right now? Yeah. There's some older tools like KSS was used a lot for like kind of CSS component systems, kind of like this. But this is really the one that's kind of emerged as the standard in how to do React components.
And what kind of latitude do you have in terms of how you want to lay out your Storybook?
Quite a bit. In fact, it's kind of dizzying how much. But with this, you can like swap out this view for your own component, basically, that does the rendering. Okay. So that's what I'm planning to do a little bit, like to put a nice header on it. And, then I'll probably have to hack this component a little bit to show whatever kind of global documentation I want to show that's not components. So in fact, I'm probably going to have to write my own Storybook add-on to achieve that, because I didn't find one that's like that out of the box. I thought I would be able to, but I didn't find one yet. Yeah, there is. They have like a Hello World one, like, hey, fork this and take it from there.
And so for Storybook View, how different, like how divergent is the code base? Is it essentially a rewrite just from scratch? Like for, what would it look like to write one for Ember or for Angular?
That's a good
Or is
question.
it just a design system? Or is it just a
In the tiny bit of time I played with it with Vue, I mean the API working with it was identical. I don't know how much the internals had to change to achieve that.
okay. Well, this is really awesome. Yeah, it is. I'm impressed with how little like code you can get up to actually have.
Right.
Even this level of documentation is really nice to have.
Yeah. Right. Yeah.
I think it also, correct me if I'm wrong, but it seems like it also encourages you to do that presentation container component separation.
It does.
Where a component that's going to be like loading its own Ajax and
You're gonna run into a rough time trying to do that. Here.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Whereas here it's just these components really are flat, and
Yeah.
you need to provide all the data, and they just need to be about actions and presentation.
And I think, when I first heard about this tool, it was mainly as a, hey, look, here's a living style guide.
Mm-hmm.
But it's interesting that Storybook has actually pitched itself more as a development environment. Hey, this is a way to really easily, if you're working on a component, spin up Storybook while you're iterating on that component. And you can see it in the browser in real time and play with it and make sure that you're building the documentation at the same time.
Mm-hmm.
And it becomes a really nice way to isolate your component,
right?
In a way that's kind of difficult otherwise.
It makes you have to do isolation first.
Yeah.
Right?
Exactly.
If isolation is the virtue, put it first.
So you would like deploy this as its own web app somewhere?
Yep. So you can build it as a static package that you can put on a GitHub page or whatever. In fact, that's what I'm going to recommend we do with it, is deploy it to GitHub pages. All right. Well, this was fun. What's the topic of our next lunch and learn?
I believe that is me.
Oh.
Correctly, it's the
Big blockchain part.
Oh, so look forward to Joe talking more about blockchain. All right, everybody have a good one. Bye.
Bye.